If you will invest in sharing your specific gratitude, your appreciation for people around you, there is a ripple effect that is so profound.
This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm your co-host this week, Brandon Smith. And this week I'm joined by my co-host and co-founder, Randy Hain. We're going to talk about something that I think everyone can relate to. Whether we're talking about the election season, we're talking about kind of hitting our numbers for the end of 2024 or lack thereof, or whether we're talking about 2025, uncertainty is a very, very big theme in all this. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing and what I'm seeing is leaders moving into their stress behavior. Maybe they've got less teammates. They've lost some teammates and there's hiring freezes. So they can't backfill those spots. They got more work on their plate. In addition to that, they're not hitting the numbers that they set out to hit in 2024. So there's a final push at the end of the year to hit those. And folks are kind of turtling in, and we're not seeing some of the very best behaviors. Mm-hmm. So, Randy, I want to turn it over to you. What are some examples of some of the stress behaviors that you're noticing from leaders, and what are some starting places of things we can do to reset ourselves so our best self is still showing up as we end this year?
Yeah. Listen, this is a great topic, Brandon. And, I would say I go into every executive coaching conversation, especially the first one or two, really still to this day, after all these years of doing this work, amazed at the level of stress that leaders have, the anxiety, the just concern about anxiety about the future, what's going to happen, where, just dealing with burnout, all these issues that are so prevalent. And today at this place we are in American business, I think we're seeing it at peak levels. As you said, with the election season, the economy's not in great shape. My clients are experiencing difficult times. Layoffs are happening. It's really stressful. So one of the things I always encourage people to do is, I know it sounds like a cliche, but take a breath and step back just for a minute. Take a breath and just think about, all right, where am I? What am I doing? How can I do this a little bit better? And I think it starts with self-awareness. I think we have to be willing to look in the mirror and just examine, how am I showing up and what can I do a little bit differently? Because what happens when you get on the flywheel and you're just going. That's the last place that you're ever going to practice self-awareness. So maybe early in the morning before you begin work, or late in the evening after you're done, or Saturday morning, whatever, find that minute or two where you can say, let me just take a breath and think for a minute about where I'm at. I think we also need to be thoughtful about priorities. We have to really make a determination. Am I living to work, or am I working to live? And, right now in these stressful times, I think many of us are quite frankly living to work. And it's a really disordered way of thinking, but it's something that happens to all of us when we get stressed and pressured. I think we also need to think about, where can I intentionally make some changes? We'll probably spend more time on this, but do we really start looking at our calendar? How do I pull back from some of the back-to-back-to-back meetings and start to get a little air in the calendar, which you and I've talked about? How do I start to layer in some exercise, some self-care activities, meditation, prayer, whatever it is that you do? Because, we've talked about this before, but you cannot give to others from an empty cup. And the worst thing you can do is ignore that when you're in stressful times, because you are going to burn out. So I think just this idea of looking in the mirror, taking a breath, recalibrating, and saying, where can I make small incremental changes to help me show up better, feel better, and really be a better husband, father, wife, whatever, leader, whatever it is, whatever role you play. How can I do those things better in a more sane way? So that's a real quick first blush at what you said.
Yeah. So I would say I'll add to this too. What I see a lot of folks doing in those times of stress, leaders, is they're falling into what I like to term the hero trap. They're saying, I got to fix this. I got to do it myself. And so you see more leaders kind of jumping in and sometimes micromanaging or just actually doing the work themselves.
Yes.
So you're seeing that behavior. The second thing you're seeing them do is when they can cancel meetings, they're canceling them.
Mhm.
So they're canceling one-on-ones. So I'm talking to a lot of my clients and they're saying, yeah, I normally would have a one-on-one every week. And now my leader's canceling all of them because they need that time to go do other things. And that sets up two very unhealthy things. First of all, it's a recipe for burnout for the individual leader because they're doing it all themselves.
Mhm.
Second, it's not helping their team shoulder that burden because they're doing it themselves. So while folks listening to this are going to absolutely hate what I'm about to say, I would recommend more meetings, particularly with your team. So you're doing it together. You're solving it together. So whenever I teach author editor, which really this is what we're talking about here is author editor. Whenever I teach author editor, when we talk about the hero trap, one of the ways we know we're doing the hero trap is it's almost like this analogy of, let's say you're a trainer and you're taking your team to the gym and you're going to teach them a new exercise. Well, the last thing that you'd want to do is for that whole hour, you lift all the heavy weights and your team just sits around and drinks coffee and watches you. And that's what most leaders are doing today. They're like, no, I got to do it. I got to lift the heavy weights. And what does that set up? It means the only person getting stronger is you, and your team isn't equipped to do that together. So if we were truly trying to help them grow, we would show them the exercise, we would set them up, we would teach them form, we'd give them feedback. I think the same is true today. We want this to feel like we're not alone and we're doing this together. So set up some meetings to actually have your team help solve this with you. Or using author editor language, put ownership, initiative, and critical thinking on your team. Push authorship to them so they can bring out some great ideas. But not only that, they feel invested in doing it. So now you're a team of 5 solving these problems instead of a team of 1. So that's what I would add to that.
I love that. Let me piggyback on that just a little bit. So I'm sure you've seen the Gallup data this year, but workforce engagement is in the 30s, which tells us that 2/3 of the workforce is disengaged. And what was really interesting about some of the recent Gallup data was that it pointed to leaders who coach as the most effective at driving better engagement. So that's exactly what you're saying. When leaders are scheduling more time, not canceling the one-on-ones. But let's be clear about what we're talking about here. This isn't just a check the box meeting. Hey, you doing okay? Everything great? All right, let's get back to business. This is a developmental conversation. This may be 30 minutes over coffee, but it's where you're asking questions like, how are you really doing? What can I do to better support you? What are 3 things you're working on right now that you're excited about? Any struggles right now you're having? How can I lead you more effectively? Asking really good questions that will drive better engagement, make the employee feel better about what they're doing, more engaged in the work, which lessens your burden as a leader. And quite frankly, it's the right thing to do. So I would say, just to piggyback on what you said that was so excellent, is adopt this coaching leader mindset. We've all got to be good coaches, even though instinctively right now, we're probably all feeling a little self-protective. I'm burned out, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I've got all these worries. To your point, I'm just going to do it myself. I don't have time to deal with that. Well, that will get you so far, but you will eventually either really achieve burnout and exit and not, it's not going to be good for you, or inevitably you might have some short-term success, but long-term your team will leave because they're not being engaged and developed. You'll have to replace that team and develop all new people. It's a cycle of stress that you need to avoid. And if you start with, I'm going to meet with my people, engage with them, that is a great place to begin. Even though you feel like you don't have time, you have to make time. And one more thing, Brandon, for something to thrive, something may have to go away. Start saying no to your ineffective meetings. Start saying no to the things that drain your time thieves, in order to create the space for the developmental conversation.
Right. So I want to add one more important point. It's a very subtle one, but it's a really key one that most of us listening to this are violating. And Randy's saying developmental conversation. Most of your one-on-ones, your team member comes to you and says, as Randy talks about, we want to make sure we're creating space for the broader developmental conversations. How are you doing? What is it you really want to work on? Or what are some things keeping you up at night? That's a broader conversation. The reality is most of the one-on-ones you're having, someone comes in and says, hey, I'm having a problem with this thing. Okay. They're bringing a problem to you, right? This issues, I can't get supply chain to give me the information I need. This is the fourth time I've reached out to IT and I can't get them to respond, right? Okay. Whatever happens to be. And when we're in periods of stress, what do? Just do da 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 da, or don't. I'll take care of that. Right? We either tell them what to do, or we jump in and do it. That's authoring. That's not a developmental conversation. That does not count as coaching. So I want to be very, very, very clear. That's you jumping in and doing the work. Okay, it's the same thing as if your kid gives you kind of a calculus homework and you go, I'll just do it for you. That's not coaching. That's you doing their homework for them. Okay, so when Randy says ask questions, he means ask questions. So say to the person, well, how do you think we can solve this? What do you think needs to happen to make this work? What can you do? Put it on them, because we're trying to create that ownership initiative and critical thinking. And we get there by asking them questions. That doesn't mean they're going to have the perfect solution. We may need to come in and offer some more pieces of advice, but we want to activate that thinking and then refine their thinking. That's where they're going to feel like we're pouring into them, and they're getting smarter, they're getting faster, they're getting better. We want to do that. Now, I want to pivot, Randy, our conversation a little bit into something else that also is lacking when we get into these periods of stress. And so everyone listening, you'll really know if you're in a real period of stress if you are doing what I'm about to say or not doing what I'm about to say. Well, you'll see. When was the last time you gave one of your direct reports some really sincere and specific feedback of gratitude? Say, I really appreciate that you did this, or I really value how you approach this. It was the last time you gave some really just great positive feedback? Probably not very recently, to be honest. If you're like most people right now in this season, the positive feedback, kudos, appreciation, that stuff has gone out the window because we are really, really just got our blinders on and we're just going straight ahead. So, Randy, this is something you've talked on and we've talked on for many, many years. What are your unlocks for leaders listening to this right now that say to themselves, yeah, I got to be honest with myself. Probably haven't given anybody feedback, good positive feedback, probably 6 months. Where can they start?
So I'm going to answer this in a way that's a little different from the way that you and I have spoken about this in the past. Because I think what I'm about to advise our listeners to do is something that will help you in a number of areas of your life, but very much in what Brandon just said. So instead of just saying, okay, I'm about to get this lecture on how I need to be nicer to my people and more grateful, I want you to start thinking about outcomes. I want you to start thinking about, I need to think down the road. What is the outcome for my team, my people, my company, my business, myself? What am I trying to get to longer term? And then start to work backwards. Because when you've got the goal in mind of where I want to be, it will affect your behaviors. This can apply to your health. I work out every day because I want to live a long time and be here for my family, my son with special needs, and my future grandchildren. I've got an outcome that I focus on that motivates me to do the things every day that probably are not my favorite things to do. So when it comes to what Brandon's talking about here, I want you to think about, even when you're busy, stressed, don't feel you have time. If you will invest in sharing your specific gratitude, your appreciation for people around you, there is a ripple effect that is so profound. People will stand up straighter. They'll be more excited and inspired to do their work. They will give you their margin, not just their basic level. They'll give you their margin between okay and excellent. They're going to start getting excellent work to you because they feel valued, they feel invested in, they feel appreciated. So if you start to get your head around, I want this outcome for my team. I want to be an amazing team. I want this leader to be my successor, even though you're at the height of your own personal stress. Make these investments for those reasons, but also it's the right thing to do. listen, I want to say to all of us that Brandon, me, everybody that's listening, leadership is a privilege. It is a privilege. We have been given the opportunity to lead. So we've got to take that very seriously and look at it not just as a way to make a number, a way to make a nice living. We have an obligation to the people around us to help them thrive. So that, I think, is just a piggyback on what Brandon's talking about. Be grateful, be appreciative, but have the bigger long-term picture, and it will really help this make sense to you. I'm doing this because I want these great results. That's my take.
I love that, Randy. Okay, so we've covered a couple of things already in our journey. I want to hit one more topic, and then we'll start to land our plane.
Sure.
So we talked about the importance of having those coaching conversations, really developing and elevating our team rather than being the hero and doing it all ourselves. We talked about the importance of giving that positive feedback and pouring into our folks, reminding them how valuable and important they are to us. That's also behavioral psychology 101. We're reinforcing the behaviors we want to see more of, to your point around outcome. Now, I mentioned also around the point of having more meetings, I want to hit this one last area. So when we talk about uncertainty drives anxiety. So when we have workplace anxiety, it typically comes from a few places. Either not enough information to solve a problem. There's a lot of unknowns. Not enough time to solve a problem. So we're being asked to do something without enough time to do it. Or not enough resources to solve a problem. Or I'm being asked to achieve a big goal and we've got half of our team staffed. Okay. But those unknowns, that uncertainty, that creates anxiety. So as a mentor of mine shared with me many years ago, we all hold a piece of the truth. In other words, everyone holds some information and data that is valuable. And to bring it home to you, every member of your team holds a piece of the truth. So I would suggest a really good practice would be, as we move into 2025, schedule at least one half day, maybe full day meeting with your team to do a little bit, not necessarily strategic planning for 2025, but scenario planning for 2025. If A and B happens, then we should do C. If just A happens and not B, then we should do D. And laying that out a little bit. So Randy, what's your thought around bringing more people kind of under the tent so we don't feel so alone and solving problems more collectively?
So I love that. I would probably take it to, a different direction. You said something very profound. Everybody's got a piece of the truth. But I think what that leads us to hopefully embrace is, let's not be afraid of the truth. So let's not be afraid as leaders to ask our teams what they really think. Right. So I love the idea of scenario planning, but I also love the idea of, all right, folks, listen, this has been a tough year. How are you feeling? What could we have done differently this year? What do we need to do differently next year? How can I lead you more effectively? What are some ideas that you all have? Don't be afraid. And I'm bringing this up from a very specific place of evidence in my memory of leaders that have these overly scripted town halls or these offsites that have packed agendas where there is no free thinking, there is no brainstorming. These are the 18 things we've got to get done today, and no one gets to share what they really think. Wouldn't it be completely bizarre for a leader to say, I just want to hear what you're all thinking. This is a safe space. We can all talk openly here. I want you all to feel comfortable. There will be no punishment. I just want to hear from you. Think about, as a leader, if you go into next year knowing what your team's thinking, you've got their input, ideas, you know what you're going to get? Buy-in. They will be bought in. They'll be excited and inspired because you actually asked the question, listen to them, and you're willing to act on the information. I think that's where we're missing the boat in these conversations. So everything you said, yes. And then what I just said would be just a cherry on the sundae.
Fantastic, Randy. And I want to build on something you said and to turn it into a practical, tactical tip.
Sure.
So let's hold the question around, how am I doing as your leader, for a moment? Because if we hold that aside, that's an uncomfortable question to ask someone in front of the whole group.
Sure.
They're going to say, well, let me give you some feedback, Brandon, in front of 5 other people. If we hold that one aside, you can ask all the other prompts that Randy mentioned around, what do you think worked well? What could we be doing differently? What resources do you need in 2025? And then kind of set some of those questions up like that, and then have each person give each person 3 minutes to answer the question.
Mhm.
So you kind of go around the horn. And why that's so important is it captures your introverts and extroverts equally.
Mhm.
It gets everybody an opportunity to voice their opinion. If you leave it kind of open-ended, your extroverts will fill up that void, and your introverts really won't get a chance to talk. They won't really know how to enter into that,
Mhm.
and we miss their pieces of truth. So if we land our plane today, Randy, so we've covered some ground today. We took this idea of uncertainty, leaders moving into their stress behavior, and we spent some time kind of moving them back out of their stress behavior into their best selves. And we're recommending really pour into your team, do more coaching rather than doing the work for your team.
Mhm.
Make sure you're giving your team positive feedback, as well as your colleagues and others around you that are working so hard. Look around a little bit and give that positive feedback. And then set some time to reflect on the last year and look into the next year with your team. So
Mhm.
you can not only go into it with a sense of certainty on what you need to work on, but also feel like you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most important outcomes of what we talked about. You do
Yes.
the things that Randy and I talked about, you should feel like you're in it together.
Yeah.
So Randy, anything else you would add before we call it success for our conversation today?
I think there are two quick things I'd add. One, I think be vulnerable. If you're a leader, practice vulnerability. We all understand that vulnerability can be uncomfortable, but if you want your team to be vulnerable, you need to model it. So vulnerability will invite vulnerability. And guess what? If you are worried about letting everyone around you know that you're struggling, stressed, whatever, they already know. So just be open and honest. People will respect you more. They'll listen to you more. They'll follow you more readily if they know that you're willing to be vulnerable. So please practice that. And then finally, Brandon, something that we were talking a lot about at the end of last year was our mutual friend Andreas Widmer and his teaching us of the phrase "Ti voglio bene." It's Italian for "I want your good." As a leader listening to this program today, we're going into the end of the year. We're thinking about next year. Have this mindset of "Ti voglio bene." I want what's best for you. I want your good. So as you're looking at your team, looking at what you're trying to get done, and maybe even looking in the mirror at yourself, think about, I want what is best for others. And ultimately, that is going to rebound on you in a very positive way. Those are my takeaways.
Randy, that's great. So as with all of our Leadership Foundry shows and podcasts, there's one ending question. What's your one takeaway from today? What's something you can put in your toolbox and toolkit? Maybe it's all three of those things we talked about today. Maybe it's a nugget you just want to take out. It doesn't really matter, but what matters the most is that you pick one thing from our conversation today, something you either want to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing, so you and your team can start thriving tomorrow and as we move into 2025 and beyond.